The morning air tasted like pine resin and distant snow, sharp enough to sting my lungs with each breath. I stood outside my cabin, fingers numb despite the worn gloves, watching the forest edge where shadows moved between ancient trees. The wagon wheel lay broken beside me, splintered wood and a bent iron rim that mocked every attempt I'd made to fix it yesterday. My supplies from town sat useless in the bed. Flour, salt, the medicine old doctor. Harrison had finally agreed to sell me after I'd waited until every other customer had left his shop. Being invisible had its advantages. Being forgotten meant being safe. The settlement of Pine Haven lay 3 miles south, close enough to hear the Sunday bells, far enough that I could pretend the distance was my choice. 2 months since the gathering, since I'd stood in the ceremonial circle wearing my mother's only good dress, since I'd felt every pair of eyes slide past me like I was made of morning mist. Omegas were rare, they said, precious, they said, but apparently not precious enough when you carried the scent of meadowgrass and rainwater instead of honeysuckle and heat. Not precious enough when you couldn't feel the pull they all talked about, that magnetic, undeniable connection that was supposed to make you someone's. I crouched beside the wheel, running my fingers over the brake. The wood had split clean through, probably from that pothole on the northern road. I'd been too distracted, thinking about the way Margaret Sullivan had whispered to her daughter as I passed. How the word broken had carried on the wind. Broken Omega. Defective. Packless. You don't need them, little dove. My mother's voice echoed from memory, soft as moth wings. She'd been gone 3 years now, taken by the fever that swept through one winter. You're whole on your own, but whole didn't fix wagon wheels. Whole didn't make the loneliness feel less like a physical weight pressing against my chest at night. A branch cracked in the forest. I froze, every instinct screaming awareness despite my supposed defectiveness. The scent hit me half a second later. Blood and leather, something wild and wounded underneath. My Omega nature surged up unbidden. That deep-seated need to help, to heal, to soothe pain even when logic said to run inside and bar the door. He emerged from between 2 massive pines, and my breath caught. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a predator's grace despite the obvious injury. His shirt hung in tatters, dark with blood that looked black in the morning shadows. Dark hair fell across a face carved from stone and suffering, sharp cheekbones and a jaw set against pain. But it was his eyes that held me, gray like winter storms, burning with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Alpha. Every cell in my body recognized it even as my mind scrambled to understand why an alpha would be out here. Alone, injured, looking at me like I was water and he was dying of thirst. Please. His voice rumbled, rough as gravel. The wagon. I can fix it. I should have been afraid, should have recognized danger in every line of his powerful frame, in the way his eyes tracked my smallest movement. Instead, I felt that strange pull in my chest, the one I'd always failed to feel at gatherings, the one that had marked me as wrong. It sang to life now, clear as a bell, terrifying as a cliff edge. You're hurt. I managed, voice barely above a whisper. I need to fix your wagon. He took a step forward, stumbled slightly. His hand pressed against his side where blood seeped between his fingers. Then I need you to forget you saw me. Can you do that? Every rational thought said to refuse. Strange alphas didn't appear from the forest at dawn, bleeding and desperate. They didn't offer to fix broken wheels with hands that shook from pain. They especially didn't look at rejected Omegas like we were something valuable. But his scent underneath the blood, cedar and night air, something ancient and vast, made my Omega instincts hum with certainty. Not danger, need. There's a workshop behind the cabin, I heard myself say. Tools. I'll get water. Bandages. Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Surprise? Relief? It vanished too quickly to name. I moved toward the cabin door, hyper-aware of him behind me, of the way he followed at a careful distance. The workshop was really just a lean-to my father had built before he died, back when I was 12, and still believed I might have a normal life. The tools inside were old but well-maintained. I'd learned early that survival meant knowing how to fix things yourself when no one else would help. He moved past me into the workshop, and I caught the full force of his scent. My knees almost buckled. Every Omega instinct I'd spent years trying to suppress roared to life, urging me to move closer, to offer comfort, I forced myself toward the cabin instead, hands trembling as I gathered clean cloth, the jar of salve Mrs. Chen had traded me for wild herbs last month, the kettle of water I'd boiled earlier. Through the window, I could see him examining the wheel, those large hands surprisingly gentle as he assessed the damage. He moved like violence waiting to happen, like contained lightning. When I returned to the workshop, he'd already begun work, using tools with practiced ease despite the wound in his side still bleeding. I set the water and bandages on the workbench, close enough to reach, far enough to maintain distance. "You should let me clean that," I said softly. "It could get infected. After." He didn't look up, focused on measuring a length of wood from the scrap pile. "The wheel first." We fell into strange silence, broken only by the rasp of saw against wood, the crackle of the small fire I'd lit in the workshop's brazier to heat water. I should have gone inside, should have given him privacy. Instead, I found myself organizing tools I'd already organized, stealing glances at the way his shoulders moved under the ruined shirt, at the concentration etched into his features. He worked for over an hour, refusing to acknowledge the blood staining his side, the pallor creeping into his face. I watched him shape new wood, reinforce the rim, fit pieces together with a skill that spoke of years of practice. His hands never faltered despite the tremor of pain I could see running through him. Finally, he stepped back. The wheel sat whole again, stronger than before. "It'll hold," he said, voice rougher than earlier. "Better than the original." He swayed then, just slightly, and I was moving before conscious thought, catching his arm. The contact sent electricity racing up my skin, that pull intensifying until it felt like standing in the center of a storm. His eyes met mine, wide with the same shock I felt. "Inside," I said firmly, Omega authority surprising us both. "Now, before you collapse in my workshop." For a moment I thought he'd refuse, alpha pride warring with alpha pragmatism. Then he nodded, once, sharp, and let me guide him toward the cabin. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the mist between the trees. Neither of us noticed the shadows that had begun to gather at the forest's edge, dark forms moving with purpose through the underbrush. Neither of us knew that by helping him, by letting him close, I'd just changed the course of both our lives. He sank onto the chair beside my hearth, and I knelt before him with hands that no longer trembled. Whatever was happening, whatever this strange pull meant, it would have to wait. First, I needed to keep him alive. The wound was worse than I'd thought. As I carefully peeled away the shredded fabric of his shirt, the full extent of the damage revealed itself. 4 parallel gashes raking across his ribs, deep enough that I could see the white of bone in places, claw marks. Something had tried to gut him and nearly succeeded. What did this? My voice came out steadier than I felt. The Omega in me wanted to whimper at his pain, to press close and offer comfort. The practical part, the part that had kept me alive alone for 2 years, kept my hands moving with purpose. Politics. The word came through gritted teeth as I pressed warm water to the wounds. The kind that doesn't care about territory lines or honor. I didn't push for more. In the shifter world, questions could be dangerous, especially for a packless Omega who'd already been marked as other. Instead, I focused on cleaning the wounds with careful precision, using the techniques my mother had taught me during the fever outbreak. She'd been a healer before the sickness took her, had believed that even a rejected Omega could serve a purpose. "You have gentle hands, little dove." That's a gift, no matter what the gathering says. His muscles tensed under my touch, body rigid with controlled pain. This close, his scent overwhelmed everything else, cedar and night storms, but underneath something else, something that sang to my Omega nature like a perfectly pitched note. I'd heard other Omegas describe their alpha's scents with poetic reverence, had felt hollow when I couldn't feel the same at gatherings. This was different. This was inevitable. "You're good at this," he said quietly, watching me with those gray eyes. "Where did you learn?" "My mother." I threaded the needle I'd sterilized in the fire, hands rock steady despite my racing heart. She was a healer. Before the fever, before the gathering. I met his gaze briefly, before a lot of things. Understanding flickered across his features. He'd heard the word I hadn't said, rejected. In our world, it carried weight, explanation, a complete history in 8 letters. This will hurt, I warned, needle poised above the deepest gash. Everything hurts. Something bleak crossed his expression, there and gone. Do what you need to. I stitched him together in silence, each pull of thread accompanied by his barely controlled breathing. He never flinched, never made a sound, but I felt the tremors running through his powerful frame. Alphas weren't supposed to show weakness, weren't supposed to accept help from Omegas they didn't claim. Yet here he sat, letting me tend his wounds with a trust that felt both precious and terrifying. When I tied off the last stitch, the sun had climbed to mid-morning. Golden light streamed through the cabin's small windows, illuminating the sparse interior. My mother's rocking chair by the hearth, the table I'd built myself, shelves lined with dried herbs and preserved foods, a life built from scraps and stubbornness. You live here alone? He accepted the cup of willow bark tea I pressed into his hands, grimacing at the bitter taste but drinking obediently. 2 years now. I busied myself cleaning the needle, storing the remaining thread. It's safer. Safer than what? Than being reminded daily that I'm defective. The words escaped before I could stop them, sharp with old hurt. That's what they call Omegas who don't bond at gatherings. Broken. Wrong. Better off alone where we can't embarrass the pack. Silence stretched between us, heavy with understanding. When I finally looked at him, his expression had shifted into something dangerous, something that made my pulse quicken for entirely different reasons. You're not defective, he said softly, each word carrying absolute conviction. You're unmated. There's a difference. Not according to Pinehaven. I turned away, crossing to the window. The forest stretched endlessly, dark pines standing sentinel. Not according to anyone who matters. Then they're fools. The certainty in his voice made me turn back. He'd risen from the chair despite my earlier orders to rest, moving toward me with that predator grace. Even injured, even weakened by blood loss, he radiated power, alpha dominance that should have made my Omega instinct scream submission. Instead, I felt seen, valued, real. You don't know me, I whispered. No. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that his cedar scent wrapped around me like a living thing. But I know what you did this morning. You helped a stranger who appeared bloody from the forest. You fixed wounds that would have killed me by nightfall. You trusted your instincts over fear. His gray eyes held mine. That's not broken. That's strong. Something cracked open in my chest. Some carefully maintained wall I'd built around the parts of me that still hoped, still wanted, still believed I might be worth something beyond survival. I should go. He stepped back, severing the moment. You've done more than enough, more than I had any right to ask. Where will you go? I gestured toward his side, now bandaged but still seeping slightly. You can barely stand. Whatever you're running from, I'm not running. Pride flickered across his features. I'm regrouping. In my forest, bleeding in my workshop, I crossed my arms, surprising myself with the firmness in my tone. You can't leave yet. You'll tear the stitches, and infection will set in by tomorrow. I can't stay. But he swayed slightly, betraying his weakness. It's not safe, for either of us. Why? He looked toward the window, jaw tight. Because they'll come looking, and when they find me, anyone nearby will be considered either ally or enemy. There's no neutral ground in this fight. What fight? The kind that's been brewing for a decade. The kind that explodes when old alphas refuse to change and young ones refuse to submit. He met my eyes again. I challenged my father for leadership of the Shadowmere pack. I lost. This, he touched his bandaged side carefully, was his final message. Leave and never return, or die. Shadowmere. The name sent ice through my veins. the largest pack in the Northern Territories, ruled by Gregory Thorne with an iron fist and old traditions that made even Pine Haven's conservative ways seem progressive. Rumors spoke of punishment circles and public challenges, of Omegas treated as property and weakness punished with exile or worse. "Your father did this to you?" Horror colored my voice. He let his second do it. More humiliating that way. Bitterness dripped from every word. But yes. His order, their claws. I moved before thinking, closing the distance between us, taking his hand in both of mine. His fingers dwarfed mine, calloused and strong despite the tremor of exhaustion running through them. "Stay until tomorrow," I said firmly. "Rest, heal, then go wherever you need to go." I squeezed his hand gently. "But don't die in my forest because you were too proud to accept help for one more day." He stared at our joined hands like they were a puzzle he couldn't solve. When his eyes lifted to mine, something raw and vulnerable looked back. "Why?" The question came out rough. "Why help me? You don't know what I am, what I've done. I could be exactly the monster my father says I am." "Are you?" I don't know anymore. The honesty in those words, the pain beneath them, decided me. "The answer is no, then." I released his hand, stepping back before the pull between us could make me do something foolish. Monsters don't question if they're monsters. They don't look at rejected Omegas like we're worth saving. And they certainly don't fix wagon wheels before asking for help with their own wounds. A sound escaped him, almost a laugh, edged with disbelief. "You've built quite the philosophy out here in your exile." "Exile requires someone caring enough to banish you formally." I managed a small smile. "I just left. No one noticed." "I notice." 2 words. They shouldn't have meant everything. Shouldn't have felt like being seen for the first time in years, like mattering, like belonging somewhere even if just in this moment. "Rest," I said again, softer, "please. Tomorrow you can go back to whatever war you're fighting." He nodded slowly, exhaustion finally winning over pride. I guided him to my bed, the only one. I'd sleep in the chair tonight, and watched him sink into the quilts my mother had made. Within minutes, his breathing had evened into sleep, the lines of pain easing slightly from his face. I sat by the window as afternoon light painted gold across the cabin floor, watching the forest edge, thinking about choices and consequences. About how one broken wagon wheel had changed everything, about how tomorrow he'd be gone. And I'd go back to being invisible. The shadows beneath the trees seemed darker than usual, but I told myself it was just the angle of the sun, just my imagination running wild from the day's strangeness. I didn't know that outside, ringing my small clearing in perfect silence. 100 wolves waited with eyes that gleamed yellow in the dimness. I didn't know that tomorrow I'd wake to find my entire world transformed. Dawn broke with unnatural silence. I woke in the rocking chair, neck stiff and back aching, to a world that felt fundamentally wrong. No birdsong, no rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. The stranger, I'd never asked his name, still slept in my bed, face peaceful in a way that made him look younger. Less like a warrior, more like someone who'd once had dreams before violence became his language. I stood slowly, careful not to wake him, and moved to the window. My heart stopped. They ringed the clearing in perfect formation, massive wolves, each one black as midnight, sitting motionless as statues. Yellow eyes gleamed in the early light, dozens upon dozens of them, watching my cabin with an intensity that made my skin prickle with primal fear. I counted 20 before my mind simply refused to process more. 50, 70, more, over 100 wolves, waiting. "Don't go outside." His voice made me jump. He'd risen from the bed, moving with a silence that should have been impossible for someone his size, especially injured. He stood beside me now, looking out at the wolves with an expression I couldn't read. "What is this?" My voice came out as a whisper. "What did you bring to my home?" "Protection." He touched the window frame, jaw tight. "And a problem." "That's not an answer." "No." He finally looked at me, those gray eyes turbulent as storm clouds. "It's not." One of the wolves stood, the largest, positioned directly in front of my door. It threw back its head and howled, the sound echoing through the forest like a physical thing. Within seconds, the entire pack joined in, a chorus that shook the cabin's walls and vibrated in my chest. Then, silence. The large wolf shifted, bones cracking and reforming with sounds that made my stomach turn. Within moments, a man stood where the wolf had been, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair. He was maybe 50, powerfully built, wearing clothes that appeared from nowhere in the way of experienced shifters. "Come out, pup." His voice carried easily across the clearing, deep and commanding. "Face what you've done." Beside me, the stranger's entire body had gone rigid, every muscle coiled with tension. "Rowan," he breathed. "They sent Rowan." "Who?" "My father's beta, his executioner." He moved away from the window, and I saw fear flicker across his features for the first time. Real, genuine fear. "He's here to finish what the second started." "Then don't go out there." I grabbed his arm without thinking. "Stay inside. They can't. They can burn the cabin down with both of us inside if I refuse." He covered my hand with his, the touch gentle despite his obvious terror. "And they will. Rowan doesn't bluff." "So you're just going to walk out there and die?" Panic made my voice sharp. "After I spent hours putting you back together?" Something almost like a smile touched his lips. "You're very fierce for a rejected Omega. Stop saying that like it's a compliment and tell me what to do." The man outside, Rowan, called again, louder this time. "I can smell her fear from here, pup. The little Omega sheltering you. Does she know what you are? What you've done? Perhaps I should tell her. Perhaps she should understand exactly what monster she's been tending." The stranger's hand tightened on mine. "When I go out there, you stay inside. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, bar the door. Don't interfere." "That's... promise me." He turned to face me fully, hands cupping my face with surprising tenderness. "Promise me you'll stay safe. That's all that matters now." "All that matters?" Anger surged through my fear. "You show up bleeding in my forest. You let me care for you. You make me feel..." I cut myself off, horrified at what I'd almost admitted. "Feel what?" His thumbs brushed my cheekbones. Featherlight. "Seen." The word escaped as barely a whisper. "You made me feel seen." His expression cracked open into something raw and beautiful and devastating. "You are seen. You're extraordinary. And I'm sorry." "For what?" "For bringing this to your door." He pressed his forehead to mine briefly, a gesture so intimate it stole my breath. "For not being strong enough to keep you out of it." Then he was moving, crossing to the door before I could stop him. My Omega instincts screamed to follow, to protect, to place myself between him and danger. I'd never felt the pull this strongly before, never understood why bonded Omegas would throw themselves into fights they couldn't win. Now I understood. Now it made terrible, perfect sense. He paused at the door, looking back. "My name is Julian Thorne. I wanted you to know." Then he stepped outside, and I was left standing in my cabin, watching through the window as he walked toward certain death. Julian moved into the clearing with his head high, every inch an alpha despite the bandages I could see through his shirt. Despite facing impossible odds, the 100 wolves remained motionless, a sea of black fur and yellow eyes. Rowan watched him approach with something like satisfaction. The prodigal son returns, wounded, weakened, protected by a packless Omega. He shook his head slowly. "How far you've fallen, pup," I challenged fairly. Julian's voice carried clearly. "By pack law." "Pack law?" Rowan laughed, the sound harsh. "You lost the right to invoke pack law when you lost the challenge. Your father showed mercy by letting you live. You repaid that mercy by fleeing to nurse your wounds and plot rebellion. I'm not plotting anything. I just want to live. Then you should have stayed away from civilization, from settlements, from..." Rowan's eyes slid past Julian to my cabin, to where I stood frozen at the window. Temptation. The way he said it made my skin crawl. "She's innocent," Julian said sharply. "She has nothing to do with this, doesn't she?" Rowan began to circle him slowly, predator toying with prey. A rejected Omega, living alone in the forest. No pack, no protection, no value. Yet somehow, the once proud Julian Thorne appears at her door, accepts her care, stays the night. He stopped circling, facing Julian directly. That sounds very much like claiming behavior to me. My heart slammed against my ribs. Claiming. The word every unmated Omega both dreamed of and feared. I didn't claim anyone, but Julian's voice had gone carefully neutral in a way that felt like a lie. No. Rowan smiled. And it was a terrible thing. Then you won't mind if we test that. Boys, he gestured lazily toward my cabin. Fetch the Omega. Let's see if our fallen prince truly doesn't care what happens to her. 10 wolves broke from the circle, loping toward my door with purpose. No! Julian's roar echoed through the clearing, and suddenly he was shifting, bones cracking, body reforming into a wolf that was nearly as large as Rowan's human form. Dark gray fur, those same storm cloud eyes, radiating fury and protective instinct. The 10 wolves stopped at his command, but Rowan was laughing. There it is, the truth beneath the denial. He shifted as well, becoming a silver-black wolf that dwarfed even Julian. You've claimed her, pup, maybe not with marks or ceremony, but in every way that matters. Your wolf knows. Your instincts know. You'd die for her. Julian's growl vibrated through the earth itself. So here's what's going to happen. Rowan's voice somehow remained human despite his wolf form, an alpha trick reserved for the most powerful. You're going to fight me. Here. Now. And when you lose, because you will lose, I'm going to take your little Omega back to Shadowmere. Your father has been looking for leverage over the southern packs. A rejected Omega, unclaimed, unprotected. She'll make excellent bait. Over my dead body. That's the idea, pup. The clearing exploded into violence. Julian launched himself at Rowan with savage precision, teeth flashing, claws extended. They collided in a tangle of fur and fury, rolling across the ground in a blur of motion too fast to follow. The other wolves maintained their circle, watching with eerie stillness as their leaders fought. I stood at the window, hands pressed against the glass, every Omega instinct screaming to do something, anything. But what could I do? I was small, weak, powerless, rejected for good reason. What use was an Omega who couldn't even feel bonds properly? Except I felt this one, felt it burning in my chest like a living flame, pulling me toward Julian with magnetic intensity. Felt it in every fiber of my being as Rowan's claws tore fresh wounds in Julian's shoulder, as Julian's teeth found purchase in Rowan's throat but couldn't hold. He was losing. Even I could see it. Rowan had decades of experience, no recent injuries, the backing of an entire pack. Julian had courage and desperation, and nothing else. This was how it would end. Julian dead in my clearing, me taken to Shadowmere used as bait, discarded when no longer useful. My mother's voice whispered from memory. Sometimes, little dove, being gentle isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight, but I'd never fought for anything. Never believed I had anything worth fighting for. Until now. My hand found the door handle. The logical part of my mind screamed that this was suicide, that I'd die in seconds, that a rejected Omega had no place in alpha battles. The rest of me, the part that recognized Julian's scent, that had felt seen for the first time in years, that understood with crystalline clarity that this mattered, moved forward. I stepped outside into the morning light, and 100 pairs of yellow eyes turned toward me. The fighting stopped instantly. Julian and Rowan separated, both bleeding, both panting, both staring at me with expressions I couldn't read. The 100 wolves remained motionless, but tension rippled through the clearing like electricity before a lightning strike. Get back inside. Julian's voice came rough through his wolf form, that alpha trick of speech. Now. I ignored him, walking forward on legs that trembled but held. Every instinct screamed to submit, to lower my eyes, to retreat before these predators who could end me with a single snap of jaws. Instead, I kept my chin up, my stride steady, remembering my mother's other lessons, the ones about dignity, about standing tall even when the world wanted you on your knees. Foolish little Omega. Rowan shifted back to human form, utterly unconcerned with his nakedness, blood dripping from the wound at his throat. Did you think your presence would stop this? That we'd be moved by your sacrifice? No. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I think you're here because Gregory Thorne is afraid. Silence crashed through the clearing like a physical force. Rowan's eyes narrowed dangerously. Careful, girl. You're speaking about an alpha you've never met. One who could crush you without thought. Then why send 100 wolves to kill one injured son? I gestured toward Julian, who'd shifted back to human form, standing now with blood streaming from fresh wounds. If Julian is truly defeated, truly powerless, why this display? Why track him to a remote cabin in the middle of nowhere? I met Rowan's gaze, forcing myself not to flinch. You're not here to execute a traitor. You're here to eliminate a threat. Something flickered in Rowan's expression. Surprise, perhaps. Respect, maybe. Or just recalculation. Smart for a reject, he said slowly. But intelligence won't save you, won't save either of you. Maybe not. I moved closer to Julian, felt his hand find mine, fingers interlacing with a certainty that felt like coming home. But you haven't killed him yet. Haven't even tried to take me. You're talking instead. Why? Rowan's jaw tightened. Around us, the circle of wolves shifted restlessly. Because. A new voice called from the forest edge. A woman emerged from between the trees. Older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair braided down her back, and eyes that held centuries of wisdom. She wore simple traveling clothes, but power radiated from her like heat from flames. The wolves nearest her immediately lowered their heads in respect. Elder Moira. Rowan's tone had shifted, gained a note of wariness. This doesn't concern the council. Doesn't it? She walked into the clearing with unhurried grace, surveying the scene with sharp intelligence. 100 Shadowmere wolves surrounding a lone Omega's cabin. The Alpha's exiled son fighting for his life. This seems exactly like council business. Julian's hand tightened on mine. You called the council, he murmured. I sent a runner last night, Rowan admitted, shooting Elder Moira an annoyed look. Protocol requires witnesses when executing. Executing. Moira's eyebrows rose. I was told you were retrieving a deserter. Now it's an execution. The pup challenged his father and lost. He was exiled. He should have stayed gone. Yet here he is, on neutral territory, 3 miles from the nearest packland. Moira moved closer, studying Julian with interest. Injured. Clearly not plotting rebellion. Her gaze shifted to me, and I felt the weight of her assessment like a physical touch, and apparently bonding with an Omega. I'm not bonded, I said quickly. I'm rejected, packless. Are you? Moira stepped closer, breathing in deeply. Her eyes widened fractionally. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. What? Julian and I spoke simultaneously. You're not rejected, child. Moira circled us slowly, that ancient gaze seeing things I couldn't understand. You're rare. There's a significant difference. I don't understand. My voice came out small. Most Omegas bond indiscriminately. Feel the pull toward any compatible alpha. Settle with the strongest who'll have them. She stopped in front of me, one weathered hand lifting to cup my cheek with surprising gentleness. But some Omegas, the rarest kind, only bond with their true match, one alpha in all the world who complements them perfectly. Everyone else, they feel nothing. The clearing had gone utterly silent. That's not possible, I whispered. That's just stories. Myths. Is it? Moira glanced at Julian. Tell me, son of Thorn, when did you first catch her scent? Yesterday morning, when I came out of the forest. And? Julian's jaw worked silently. Finally, it felt like being struck by lightning. Like every search I'd ever made ended in that moment. Like... He looked at me. Raw honesty in those gray eyes. Like finding something I didn't know I'd lost. Tears burned in my eyes. I felt it too. I thought I was broken because I never felt it at gatherings, never felt it with anyone, until him. Because none of them were yours, Moira smiled, and it transformed her stern features into something warm. True bond Omegas wait their whole lives for the right alpha. Most never find them, die alone, believing themselves defective. But when they do find their match, she gestured toward our joined hands. The bond is unbreakable. Absolute. Worth 100 lesser connections. Rowan made a disgusted sound. Fairy tales. The girl's reject? The boy's exiled. This changes nothing. It changes everything, Moira countered sharply. True bonds are sacred, recognized by every pack law, every ancient tradition. To interfere with one is to invite the council's direct intervention. Her voice hardened. So I'll ask you clearly, Beta Rowan. Are you prepared to violate sacred law, to answer for it before the full council? The wolves around the clearing began to shift nervously. Pack law was absolute, but council law was universal. No alpha, no matter how powerful, wanted to face the council's judgment. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. Gregory won't accept this, his son bonding with a nobody Omega. It undermines everything. Then Gregory can bring his concerns to the council formally. Moira's tone left no room for argument. But this, she gestured around the clearing, ends now. Take your wolves home, Beta. Tell your alpha that his son is under council protection until the bond's nature can be formally assessed. You can't. I can. I have. Leave. Now. For a long moment, I thought Rowan would refuse, thought violence would erupt again, that Moira's presence wouldn't be enough to stop what Gregory Thorne had set in motion. The tension stretched so tight I could barely breathe. Then Rowan shifted back to wolf form and turned away. The 100 wolves rose as one, a coordinated movement that was beautiful and terrifying. Within minutes, they'd melted back into the forest, black shadows dissolving into the trees. We were left standing in the clearing, Julian and I still holding hands, Moira watching us with an expression that mixed satisfaction and concern. You've bought yourselves time, she said quietly. Maybe a few weeks, maybe a month. But Gregory won't let this go. He can't afford to. His power base is already cracking, and a son who defied him successfully, that's a story that spreads, that inspires others. What do we do? My voice shook despite my best efforts. You run. Moira pulled a small leather pouch from her belt, pressing it into Julian's free hand. There's money there. Enough to get you far from here. North, preferably. The mountain packs are more progressive, less concerned with old grudges. Find sanctuary. Complete your bond. Build a life where Gregory's reach can't find you. Just run? Julian's voice carried frustration. Hide forever? Or stay and fight a fight you can't win? Not yet. Not with you wounded and her untrained. Moira's expression softened. I know it feels like cowardice, but sometimes survival is its own kind of courage. She started to turn away, then paused. One more thing. You're Omega? What's your name, child? Sarah. I managed. Not just Sarah. Anything. You're a true bond Omega, Sarah. That makes you extraordinary. She smiled. Take care of each other. The world has precious few real bonds left. Don't waste yours. Then she was gone, disappearing into the forest with the same unhurried grace she'd arrived with. Julian and I stood alone in the clearing, the morning sun now fully risen, painting everything gold. His wounds had reopened during the fight, blood staining the bandages I'd applied with such care. My cabin stood behind us, small and humble, and suddenly feeling like the last safe place in a world gone mad. So, Julian's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a gentle motion at odds with the violence we'd just survived. True bond mates. That's unexpected. That's terrifying, I corrected. Your father wants you dead. Now he'll want me dead too. We have to run. To hide too. Sarah. He turned me to face him, both hands cupping my face now. Breathe. We'll figure this out. How? Panic made my voice sharp. How do we figure out being hunted by one of the most powerful alphas in the territories? How do I... My breath hitched. How do I be someone worth this? Worth defying your father? Worth council protection? Worth... You already are. His forehead touched mine, that gesture that had felt intimate yesterday, and now felt essential. You were worth it the moment you helped a bleeding stranger, instead of turning him away. You were worth it when you stood up to Rowan despite being terrified. You're worth it now. Questioning everything, doubting yourself, being so perfectly frustratingly human. Tears spilled over, running down my cheeks. I don't know how to do this, how to be what you need. Then we'll learn together. His lips brushed my forehead gently. Starting with getting me patched up again, before I bleed out in your clearing, and ruin this dramatic moment. A laugh escaped through my tears, surprised, slightly hysterical, but real. Inside, I managed, stepping back and tugging his hand. Now, before you undo all my hard work from yesterday. We walked back to the cabin together, and despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the impossible odds, something in my chest felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time since the gathering, since my mother's death, since every small rejection that had convinced me I was broken, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Even if that somewhere was running for our lives. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. We left Pine Haven behind the same day, taking only what I could carry in a pack, my mother's journal, dried herbs, the handful of precious items that made a life feel real rather than just survived. Julian had wanted to leave immediately, to put as many miles between us and Shadowmere as possible, but I'd insisted on one stop first. The settlement proper had been quiet in the afternoon lull, most people either working or resting before evening chores. I'd walked to Mrs. Chen's shop with my head high, Julian waiting at the forest edge like a shadow. The old woman had looked up from her counter, her weathered face creasing with surprise. "Sarah? Child, we heard rumors. Wolves at your cabin. I'm leaving." I'd interrupted gently. "Going north. I wanted to thank you. For the trades. For being kind when others weren't." She'd studied me for a long moment, her sharp eyes seeing more than I wanted to reveal. Then she'd pressed a small package into my hands. Traveling food, practical and thoughtful, and squeezed my fingers. "Be safe, little one. Sometimes the best life is the one you build far from home." Those words had carried us through 3 weeks of travel. North through forests that grew denser and wilder, through mountains that scraped the sky, through valleys where mist clung like ghosts to morning ground. Julian's wounds healed slowly, hindered by constant movement and insufficient rest. But he never complained, never suggested we stop for longer than necessary, because stopping meant being found. We'd heard the howls twice, distant, searching, the sound of Gregory's hunters ranging farther than we'd hoped. Each time we'd moved faster, pushed harder, until my legs burned, and Julian's face went gray with exhaustion. Now, finally, we stood at the border of Ironwood territory. The mountain pack's lands stretched before us, pine forests giving way to rocky peaks dusted with early snow. A marker stone stood at the boundary line, carved with the Ironwood sigil, a wolf's head wreathed in iron chains, symbolizing strength and protection. Beyond it, smoke rose from what must be their main settlement, visible even from this distance. "Last chance to change your mind." Julian's voice carried forced lightness, but I felt the tension in his frame where we stood pressed together for warmth. We crossed that line. We're asking for sanctuary, putting ourselves at the mercy of strangers. As opposed to staying out here where your father's hunters will eventually find us? I looked up at him, this alpha who'd become my entire world in the span of weeks. His dark hair had grown longer, falling into those gray eyes. The sharp angles of his face had softened slightly with genuine smiles, with laughter that came more easily each day. "Besides, you know Alpha Kane. You said he was reasonable. I said I met him once at a council gathering 5 years ago, and he didn't immediately try to kill me. That's not the same as reasonable." Despite everything, I smiled. "High standards you've got there. Learned from the best." His arm tightened around my waist, pulling me closer. "You sure about this? Really sure? Because once we cross, once we formally ask for sanctuary, there's no going back to anonymity. Everyone will know about the true bond. About us." "Good." I turned in his arms, facing him fully. "I'm tired of hiding what I feel, tired of pretending this." I gestured between us, at the bond that had grown from lightning strike attraction into something deep and unshakable. "Isn't the most real thing I've ever known." His expression transformed into something that made my breath catch. Love, raw and undeniable, mixed with wonder that I could want this, want him, despite everything it cost. "Have I mentioned you're extraordinary?" His hands cupped my face with the gentleness that always surprised me, that contrasted so sharply with his warrior's strength. Once or twice, I stood on my toes, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that had become as necessary as breathing. Now stop stalling and let's go meet your reasonable alpha friend who didn't immediately try to kill you. We crossed the boundary together, hand in hand, and within minutes I felt eyes on us. Watchers in the trees, scouts tracking our progress. Ironwood took their borders seriously, it seemed. Good. That meant they took protection seriously too. The settlement appeared gradually through the trees, larger than Pine Haven, more organized, with stone buildings alongside wooden cabins. A central square bustled with activity despite the late afternoon hour. People paused as we entered, conversations dying mid-word as they caught our scents, strangers. One clearly injured, both obviously exhausted, an Omega. I felt their recognition like a physical touch, saw curiosity and speculation flicker across multiple faces. True bond Omegas were rare enough to be remarkable, one traveling with an alpha who radiated power despite his wounds. That was a story waiting to unfold. Julian Thorne. The voice came from our left, deep and carrying absolute authority. I'll admit, when my scouts reported a Shadowmere wolf at my border, you weren't who I expected. The man who approached was massive even by alpha standards, easily 6.5 feet tall, built like the mountains themselves. Dark hair shot through with silver, a beard that somehow made him look distinguished rather than wild, and eyes the color of aged whiskey that missed nothing. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never had to prove his strength, who simply was powerful, and let that speak for itself. Alpha Kane. Had to be. Alpha Kane. Julian's posture had shifted subtly, respectful, but not submissive, acknowledging rank without surrendering his own dignity. Thank you for seeing us. Seeing you implies I had a choice. You're standing in my settlement square, but Kane's tone carried amusement rather than offense. His gaze shifted to me, and I fought the urge to hide behind Julian. And you've brought a guest, my mate. Julian's hand found mine, fingers interlacing with unconscious possessiveness. Sarah. We're here to request sanctuary, murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Sanctuary was serious business, implying danger and obligation, and pack politics that could spiral in 100 directions. Kane's expression remained neutral. Sanctuary from what? My father. Gregory Thorne of Shadowmere. The murmurs grew louder. Everyone knew that name, knew the reputation. To request sanctuary from your own alpha, your own father, that spoke of betrayal or justified fear. Probably both. That's a heavy request. Kane gestured toward a large building at the square's edge. Pack hall, by the look of it. Let's discuss this somewhere more private. You both look like you're about to fall over, and this conversation requires clear heads. We followed him inside, into a space that was somehow both imposing and welcoming. High ceilings with exposed beams, a massive fireplace crackling with warmth, tables and chairs arranged for communal meals rather than rigid hierarchy. The scent of pine and something else, iron maybe, living up to the pack's name, permeated everything. Kane gestured us to chairs near the fire, then surprised me by personally bringing us food and water. Not a dominance display, but genuine hospitality. Eat first, he said, settling into his own chair with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. Then talk. I find sanctuary requests make more sense on full stomachs. The food was simple but well prepared. Bread, cheese, dried meat, apples that tasted like autumn. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the first bite, hadn't registered how hollow exhaustion had made me. Julian ate with similar desperation. Both of us too drained for pride. Kane waited patiently, sipping from a mug of something that smelled like herbal tea, studying us with those whiskey eyes. Finally, when we'd eaten enough to take the edge off starvation, he spoke. So, Gregory Thorne's son, requesting sanctuary, with a true bond Omega if I'm reading the sense correctly. At our surprised looks, he smiled slightly. I'm old, not ignorant. I've met maybe 3 true bond pairs in my lifetime. The connection is unmistakable once you know what to look for. Then you understand why we're running. Julian set down his cup carefully. My father sees her as leverage at best, liability at worst. He's already sent Rowan and 100 wolves to... He paused, jaw tightening, to eliminate the problem. Which problem? You or her? Both, probably. Kane was quiet for a moment, fingers drumming against his mug. I knew your father once, 30 years ago, before his mate died and grief turned him bitter. He was different then. Still hard, still traditional, but there was honor underneath. Principle. He met Julian's gaze directly. What happened? Julian's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. I challenged him, for leadership, because Shadowmere was suffocating under his rule, because Omegas were being treated like property, because anyone who questioned tradition was exiled or worse. I thought I could change things, thought I was strong enough. But you lost. He let his second tear me apart in front of the entire pack, then exiled me with the warning that if I ever returned, death would be a mercy. His voice had gone flat, recounting facts without emotion. I ran. Found myself at Sarah's cabin. She helped me despite knowing nothing about me, despite every reason to turn me away, and when my father's wolves came for me, she stood between us. Defied Rowan himself. Kane's eyebrows rose as he looked at me. You stood against Rowan, voluntarily. Heat crept up my cheeks. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. In retrospect, maybe not my smartest moment. A surprised laugh escaped the alpha. Bravery and intelligence don't always align, girl. But the fact that you're here, alive, suggests you have both in sufficient quantities. He leaned back, considering. Sanctuary is complicated. It means defying another alpha, potentially starting conflicts that could affect every wolf in my pack. I need to be certain this is justified, that I'm not harboring fugitives who deserve what's chasing them. We're not... Julian started hotly. Kane held up a hand. Peace, pup. I'm not accusing. I'm explaining process. For sanctuary to be granted, I need to understand the full situation. Which means... He turned to me. I need to hear your side, Sarah. Without your mate's protective instincts coloring the tale, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment that would decide if we had a future, or if we'd be turned away to face Gregory's hunters alone. I'm nobody, I started, then caught myself. No, that's not true. I'm a true bond Omega who spent 22 years believing I was broken because I couldn't feel connections like other Omegas could. I was rejected at the gathering, lived alone, survived on the edges of pack life in Pine Haven. I took a breath, steadying myself. When Julian appeared at my cabin, bleeding and desperate, I helped him because that's what my mother taught me. That compassion matters more than pack politics or status or fear. I met Kane's eyes, forcing myself not to look away. I didn't know who he was, didn't know about the challenge or his exile or any of it. I just knew someone needed help, and I could provide it. When the 100 wolves came, when Rowan threatened to take me as bait for Gregory's games, Julian fought for me, nearly died for me. A stranger he'd known less than a day. My voice grew stronger. So yes, we're asking for sanctuary. Not because Julian deserves to hide from consequences of his own actions, but because Gregory Thorne turned a leadership challenge into an execution order. Because he'd rather eliminate his own son than risk anyone thinking strength comes from anything other than brutality. Because... I squeezed Julian's hand, felt his support flowing through the bond. Because we found something rare and precious and worth protecting, and we're asking you to help us protect it. Silence filled the hall. Outside, the sounds of evening settlement life continued. Children laughing, adults calling to one another, the normal rhythms of pack existence. Inside, everything balanced on Kane's next words. Elder Moira vouched for you, he said finally. Sent a runner 3 days ago, warning me you might be coming this way. She doesn't vouch lightly. Relief flooded through me so intense I felt dizzy. She did? Said I'd be a fool to turn away a true bond pair, that the council itself had declared you under protection. Kane's expression shifted into something almost amused. Also said that if I did turn you away, she'd personally ensure I regretted it for the remainder of my considerably shortened life. Moira can be very persuasive when motivated. Julian made a sound between a laugh and a sob. So, you'll grant sanctuary? On conditions. Kane's tone turned serious. First, You both submit to pack law while here. That means respecting hierarchy, contributing to community welfare, and accepting that my word is final in disputes. Second, you complete your bond properly. True bondmates are powerful assets, but only when fully connected. Unmated pairs are liabilities, too volatile, too vulnerable to manipulation. Third, when Gregory comes, and he will come, you stand with Ironwood. No running, no hiding behind our warriors while refusing to fight. We protect you. You protect us. Understood? Understood, we said simultaneously. Good. Kane stood, and we scrambled to follow. Emma, he called toward a doorway I hadn't noticed. Come meet our new guests. A woman emerged, tall, lean, with the silver blonde hair and sharp features of a born beta. She assessed us with intelligent green eyes, then smiled. Julian Thorne, I remember you from the council gathering. You stole all the pastries from the dessert table. Julian had the grace to look embarrassed. I was 17 and stress-eating. In my defense, they were excellent pastries. They were my pastries, she said. But her tone held warmth. I'm Emma, Kane's beta and mate. Welcome to Ironwood. You both look like you're about to collapse. So let's get you settled before the formal introductions and pack politics. She led us through the settlement with easy efficiency, pointing out relevant buildings, the healer's lodge, the communal kitchens, the training grounds where warriors practice daily. Ironwood was larger than I'd realized, at least 300 wolves based on the number of dwellings. And unlike Pinehaven, everything felt alive. People smiled at us, curious but not hostile. Children played without fear. Even the air felt different, safer somehow, despite being so close to territories where we were hunted. Our cabin was small, but well built, tucked against the forest edge with a view of the mountains. Someone had already prepared it, fire in the hearth, fresh linens on the bed, even wildflowers in a jar on the table. Rest tonight, Emma said from the doorway. Tomorrow, you'll meet the pack properly. There'll be questions, concerns, probably some assholes who think harboring Shadowmere's exiled prince is asking for trouble. But Kane's word is law, and he's declared you under protection. That means something here. After she left, Julian and I stood in the middle of the cabin, suddenly alone for the first time in hours. The reality of what had just happened crashed over me in waves. We made it, I whispered. We actually made it. We made it. He pulled me into his arms, holding tight enough that I felt his heart racing against mine. You were incredible in there. The way you spoke to Kane, standing up for us. I was terrified. Terrified and brave aren't mutually exclusive. His lips found my temple, my cheek. Finally my mouth in a kiss that tasted like relief and promise. Thank you. For everything. For believing this was worth fighting for. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Of course it's worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for. Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability and desire and love so intense it made my chest ache. Kane said we should complete the bond. He's right. It's dangerous to leave it incomplete. Makes us vulnerable. But Sarah? His hand cupped my cheek gently. I won't push. This has to be your choice, made freely. Not because an alpha ordered it, or because we're afraid of Gregory. I'd thought about this during our 3 weeks of travel. Thought about what bonding meant, what it would change, what it would make permanent. In the old stories my mother told, true bond mates became two halves of one soul, connected so deeply that one couldn't exist without the other. It should have terrified me. Instead, it felt inevitable. I choose this, I said clearly. I choose you. Not because Kane said so or because your father's hunting us. Because you see me, Julian. You make me feel extraordinary when the world spent years convincing me I was broken. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every version of it. His kiss was different this time. Deeper, hungry, carrying weeks of suppressed desire. We'd been careful during travel, both too exhausted and wary for more than chaste affection. Now, safety wrapped around us like a blanket, and the bond between us sang with need. He lifted me easily, carrying me to the bed with reverent gentleness. What followed was slow and deliberate, a claiming that went beyond physical into something spiritual. When his teeth found the junction of my neck and shoulder, marking me as his with the traditional bond bite. I felt our connection snap into place with crystalline perfection. Suddenly, I could feel his emotions layered over my own. Love and protectiveness, and fierce joy. Could sense his presence like a second heartbeat, constant and reassuring. The loneliness that had haunted me my entire life simply vanished. I marked him in turn, my smaller teeth finding his throat, completing the circle. His groan of pleasure-pain reverberated through our new bond, and I gasped at the intensity of shared sensation. Afterward, we lay tangled together, tracing the fresh marks with gentle fingers. "How do you feel?" he murmured against my hair. "Complete." The word came easily, truthfully. Like I've been carrying around half a soul my whole life and finally found the missing piece. That's exactly it. His arms tightened around me. "God, Sarah, I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful for it." "You fixed my wagon wheel," I smiled against his chest, "and didn't die in my forest." "High bar, really." His laugh rumbled through both of us now, shared through the bond. Highest standards, remember. We slept deeply that night, wrapped in each other and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, we were safe. We were together. We were whole. The next morning dawned bright and cold. Julian and I dressed carefully. Me in the simple clothes I'd carried from Pine Haven. Him in borrowed items Emma had left while we slept. The formal pack meeting was scheduled for mid-morning, giving us time to prepare mentally for the scrutiny that would come. "Nervous?" Julian asked, lacing his fingers through mine as we walked toward the central square. "Terrified," I admitted. What if they hate us? What if they think we're more trouble than we're worth? Then we deal with it. Together. The square was already packed when we arrived. Hundreds of wolves gathered in a loose circle, conversations humming like disturbed bees. Kane stood at the center on a raised platform, Emma beside him. When they spotted us, Kane gestured us forward. The crowd parted, creating a path. I felt every eye on us, felt speculation and curiosity, and in some cases, hostility. A Shadowmere wolf bringing danger to their doorstep. A nobody Omega claiming true bond status. We were everything controversial wrapped in one package. Ironwood Pack. Kane's voice carried easily across the square. I present Julian Thorne and his mate, Sarah. They've requested sanctuary from Shadowmere, and after review, I've granted it. They'll be living among us, contributing to our community and our under-pack protection. Silence greeted this announcement. Then, "With respect, Alpha," a voice called from the crowd. A young man, maybe 30, with the bearing of a warrior. "We all know what sanctuary from Shadowmere means. Gregory Thorne doesn't let insults go unanswered. Harboring his exiled son is asking for war." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. "War is always a possibility," Kane acknowledged calmly. "But so is standing for what's right." Julian challenged his father over treatment of pack members, over traditions that hurt rather than helped. He lost that challenge, but the questions he raised were valid. Should we punish him for having courage? Should we ignore true bond mates because protecting them is inconvenient? True bond. A woman's voice now, skeptical. That's a convenient claim. How do we know they're not just playing on sympathies? Before Kane could respond, I stepped forward. Julian's hand tightened on mine, but he let me move, trusting me to handle this myself. "You don't know," I said clearly, projecting my voice across the square. "You don't know me, don't know my history, have no reason to trust my word, but I spent 22 years believing I was broken, rejected at my gathering because I couldn't feel what other Omegas felt. Lived alone, convinced I'd die unmated and unwanted. I touched the bond mark on my neck, fresh and obvious. Then Julian appeared in my forest, and everything changed. I felt the pull everyone talks about, felt seen and valued and whole for the first time in my life. I scanned the crowd, making eye contact with as many people as possible. So yes, we're asking you to take a risk, to believe in something rare and trust that we're worth the danger we bring. But I promise you, we'll earn that trust. We'll contribute, protect, and stand with Ironwood through whatever comes, because this pack offered us something Shadowmere never did, a chance to be ourselves without fear. Silence again. Then, unexpectedly, someone started clapping. An older woman, gray-haired and weathered, with kind eyes. Others joined her. Not everyone, but enough. The sound built until more than half the pack was applauding, accepting us despite the risks. "Ironwood protects its own," Kane declared, voice ringing with finality. "Julian and Sarah are ours now. Anyone who threatens them threatens us all. We clear?" A chorus of acknowledgement rose from the crowd. Not universal acceptance, but enough. A foundation we could build on. The formal meeting dissolved into social introductions. People approached cautiously, curious about the true bond pair, asking questions that ranged from respectful to prying. Julian handled it with grace I hadn't known he possessed, charming and humble by turns. And slowly, over hours of conversation, I began to believe we might actually have a future here. 3 months later, autumn had painted the mountains in flames of red and gold. I stood at the training grounds watching Julian spar with Marcus, one of Ironwood's senior warriors. They moved like dancers, all controlled violence and perfect timing. Julian's wounds had healed completely, his strength returning until he was once again the formidable fighter he'd been before exile. "He's good," Emma said, appearing beside me with her usual silent efficiency. She'd become a friend over these months, teaching me pack customs and defending me when needed. "Better than good. If Gregory does come, we'll be ready." "Do you think he'll come?" "Eventually." She watched the sparring with a tactical eye. "But not yet. Word is he's dealing with internal challenges. Wolves questioning his leadership after what happened with Julian. Turns out, exiling your son for asking reasonable questions doesn't inspire loyalty." Hope fluttered in my chest. "So maybe Gregory will fall before he comes for you?" "Possible." Emma squeezed my shoulder, "But don't count on it. Men like him tend to go down swinging." Julian finished the match, both fighters saluting each other with respect. He spotted me and his face transformed. That smile he saved just for me, the one that never failed to make my heart stutter. Through the bond, I felt his love wash over me like sunlight. He jogged over, sweaty and grinning. "Enjoying the show?" "Always." I stood on my toes to kiss him, not caring who watched. Public affection was encouraged in Ironwood, seen as a sign of pack bonds and trust. "Kane wants to see us," Emma said, her tone shifting to business. "Something about a messenger from the council." We exchanged glances. Council business was rarely simple. In Kane's office, we found him reading a letter, expression carefully neutral. He looked up as we entered. "News from Elder Moira," he said without preamble. "Gregory Thorne has formally challenged council ruling on your protected status. He's demanding you be returned to Shadowmere for judgment." My stomach dropped. Julian's hand found mine automatically. "And?" Julian's voice was steady, but I felt his fear through the bond, and the council denied him, unanimously. Kane smiled then, fierce and satisfied. Moira cited true bond law, sanctuary rights, and about 15 other precedents that basically amount to, "Go fuck yourself, Gregory." Direct quote. Relief made me dizzy. So it's over? He can't touch us? Legally? No. In practice? Kane's smile faded. Gregory doesn't care much about legality when his pride's involved. You're still under Ironwood protection? Still safe here. But if you ever leave pack territory? We won't, I said firmly. This is home now. Good answer. Kane folded the letter carefully, because Ironwood's grown attached to you both. You're ours now. For better or worse. Later, as the sun set behind the mountains, Julian and I sat on our cabin's porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm was around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest, the bond between us humming with contentment. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your old life for this?" I thought about Pine Haven, about the cabin I'd abandoned, about the lonely years of believing I was broken. "Not even once," I said honestly. "That wasn't a life. It was just surviving. This..." I gestured at the settlement around us, at the pack that had become family. "This is living. I love you." The words came soft, reverent. Every day I love you more. It seems impossible, but it keeps growing. Good. I tilted my head to kiss his jaw. Because you're stuck with me now. True bond and all. His laugh rumbled through our connection, warm and safe. Stuck with you, he repeated. Best trap I ever walked into. We sat together as night deepened. Two halves of one soul, finally whole. Whatever came next, Gregory's plots or council politics or the simple challenges of pack life, we'd face it together, because some bonds weren't just rare or precious or worth protecting. Some bonds were forever, and ours had only just begun.